About 6 months ago, I decided to do something that you might think sounds a little bit crazy. I was going to completely stop playing modern games and spend my time exclusively playing older ones. No microtransactions, no live service, no online gameplay, nothing. Not remakes, not modern indie games that were inspired by retro games, real, actual old games. NES, SNES, Genesis, Atari, PlayStation 1, PlayStation 2, and more. Basically all the games I either missed entirely growing up or never even gave a fair chance because I assumed they were outdated. At the time, I really didn't know what I was expecting. Part of me thought I was going to discover a bunch of forgotten masterpieces, and another part of me thought I was about to suffer through 6 months of clunky controls, cryptic design decisions, and games that people only remembered because of nostalgia. Well, I was completely wrong. Now, I do need to point out that I'm not completely ignorant when it comes to older games. My favorite game, after all, is on the Nintendo 64. My favorite era of gaming to this day is the PlayStation 1 through PlayStation 3 era, so I'm not some brain-rotted new school gamer that thinks the slop that we get nowadays is peak gaming. Not by any means. So I did expect to have a great time for the most part during my time travel journey. But what I didn't expect was for those games to completely change the way I look at video games. And since we're officially 6 months into my video game time travel experiment that was originally only supposed to be 2 months, I feel like now's a good time to recap on what I've learned so far. Hey there, all you beautiful guardians of the glaze. Welcome back to the Milky Donut. If you're new here, this is the Milky Donut. We do all things video games, movies, and pop culture. And if you're not new here, the world is absolutely a better place with you in it. And I want you to remember that. Well, before we yet again jump back into our video game time travel machine, as always, I would like to mention that I do have a goal of reaching 10,000 subscribers as quickly as I can. So if you could go ahead and like this video, leave the glaziest of comments, hype it if you can, and subscribe if you think it's worthy of the algorithm. As always, shout out to the subscriber of the week, Mr. Honest Grifter, and make sure you stick around to the end of the video for the reveal of the brand new subscriber of the week, because it could very well be you. And with all of that nonsense out of the way, let's power up the video game time travel machine and look back at the last 6 months of exclusively playing really old games. Keep in mind that I do have a video for every game that I talk about here, so if you do find yourself getting curious, feel free to check those out. When I started this journey, I was looking at old games through the same lens that a lot of people do. I assumed that gaming had simply gotten better over time, at least generally speaking. To be fair, as I briefly mentioned earlier, I do in a lot of ways feel like gaming peaked during the mid-2000s, and I do feel like most modern games suck in a lot of ways, but at the beginning of all this, I still felt like we had improved on many aspects of gaming overall. Better graphics, better technology, bigger worlds, more content, more features. My natural assumption was that games had evolved in a straight line, and that older titles were mostly stepping stones that modern developers had long since surpassed. Well, 6 months later, I've learned that that couldn't be further from the truth. Now, of course, there are aspects of modern gaming that have clearly improved, which we'll get into later, but for now, let's get into what I learned. The first thing that these old games taught me was the value of respecting the player's time. And I know that sounds strange because a lot of older games are often criticized for being way too difficult, but difficulty and wasting your time are two completely different things. When I played games like Super Metroid, Mega Man X, Contra Hard Corps, Castlevania 4, Donkey Kong Country, and more, the difficulty was one thing that stood out immediately, but we'll get into the difficulty in a little bit. I think the biggest thing that stood out to me, however, was that they got out of your way. And what I mean by that is you just press start and you're playing. There were no lengthy, boring tutorials, no self-indulgent 20-minute opening cutscene that explains every mechanic, basically just serving as an overly cinematic exposition dump. No markers or hand-holding cues that clutter the screen, and no long introduction that you're forced to sit through while the game decides if it even trusts you enough to move your character. The game simply handed you the controls and expected you to figure things out, because it respected you and your intelligence enough to have faith that you're not a complete idiot. And even if you are a complete idiot, it still expects you to figure it out anyways. It doesn't stoop down to your idiotic levels. And at first, that almost felt uncomfortable, like something was missing, but then I realized just how unbelievably refreshing that was. I started to realize how much modern gaming conditions you to wait before the fun begins. Many modern games seem terrified that players might get confused because God forbid you get stuck for 5 minutes. Older games often had the complete opposite philosophy. Like I said, they trusted you, sometimes maybe a little bit too much, but that trust creates a different relationship between you as the player and the game. Instead of being guided through every single moment, I was discovering things completely on my own, and no game demonstrated that better than Super Metroid for the SNES. And if you've seen that video, you know that it unexpectedly became one of the best games that I've ever played. It absolutely blew my mind. Going into it, I only knew that it was considered one of the greatest games ever made, but I wasn't prepared for how good it actually was. Super Metroid barely explains anything. It just drops you onto a hostile alien planet and lets you go. And somehow, despite telling you almost nothing, it teaches you absolutely everything. You learn through observation, through experimentation, exploration, and getting lost, all while one of the most immersive atmospheres I've ever seen in a game surrounds you. The entire time, you're finding your own solutions to obstacles that you encounter. Super Metroid trusts you enough to let you fail. A lot. That was a recurring lesson throughout this entire experiment. Old games are not afraid of failure. As a matter of fact, they encourage it. The Lion King humbled me, Battletoads killed me 700 times, gave me an ego death without psychedelics, and I still haven't beat it. Contra Hardcore took the man that I thought I was and got rid of it. I don't know what it did with it, but it's not here anymore. There were moments where I questioned whether I was ever going to make progress, if the video that I was planning on making was ever going to get made. And if you've seen my videos, you might not get the complete sense of how much I was struggling because they weren't live and I pretty much just talked after the fact, so I could cut out all the hours of struggle, but your boy was absolutely grinding. There were moments where I died so many times to the exact same obstacle that I actually thought I had a hand-eye coordination disability. And these were the most frustrating moments because I really wanted to blame the game rather than admit that I just needed to improve, even though deep down I knew that I just sucked. But eventually, something inside of me snapped. I wasn't just progressing through these games, I was learning them. At this point, beating the game was no longer the goal. Mastering it was. You see, my beautiful guardian of the glaze, modern games often focus so heavily on progression, getting you from one cutscene to the next. Old games, however, focused on mastery and improvement to get you from one level to the next, and those are two very different things. Progression is inevitable. I mean, given enough time, most players will eventually move forward, but mastery has to be earned. Battletoads didn't give a single flying fuck how badly I wanted to see the next level, and trust me, if you've seen my Battletoads video, you know how badly I wanted that. It wanted proof that I was even worthy of holding the controller. And while that design philosophy can certainly become extremely frustrating, there's also something incredibly satisfying about overcoming a challenge that once felt impossible. The older I get, the more I realize that some of my favorite gaming memories weren't moments where a game handed me a victory, they were moments where I finally conquered something that seemed impossible hours earlier. Another thing that these games taught me was that the atmosphere has very little to do with graphical power. Before this experiment, I probably would have told you that graphics were one of the biggest advantages that modern games had over older ones. Well, I don't think that anymore. I'm not saying that a Super Nintendo game that's trying to look realistic looks better than a modern AAA game, and I'm also not saying that hyper-realistic graphics don't have their place, because they certainly do, but what I am saying is that limitations often force developers to become a lot more creative. In a lot of ways, I think these games, especially the SNES and Sega Genesis era, do look better with their gorgeous art designs and character models. Insane graphics weren't the priority. The music, the level design, the responsive controls, and the atmosphere was. I truly believe that the over-prioritization of graphics is a big issue that we face in today's gaming industry. Not because great graphics are a bad thing, but because they focus so much on that one aspect of the game that they, seem to forget that it's a video game. Hence why I say modern games focus more on the video than they do the game. I mean, what good is a Ferrari if there's no engine? Yeah, it looks great, but you're gonna get bored pretty quick. I still think about the rain falling in Super Metroid's opening area and the eerie music that accompanies it. I still think about the haunting castles and stormy moonlit hallways of Castlevania, and the pirate ships, amusement parks, and underwater levels of Donkey Kong Country 2. I still think about wandering through Earthbound's strange version of America where zombies, cults that want to paint things blue, aliens, corrupt politicians, and talking piles of throw-up somehow coexist in the same universe. These games all have extremely identifiable identities. If you were shown even one frame of these games, you would know exactly what you're looking at. Can you tell me what this game is from? Oh, I don't know about you, but I can't. Now, what about this? Well, even if you don't know what game this is, you definitely know what it isn't. My point is, you can only put so much style and art design into something that revolves completely around realism. Earthbound in particular completely changed my perspective on creativity in games. On paper, to be honest, it almost sounds stupid. A kid with a baseball bat fights all the random things that I just mentioned, along with the manifestations of pure cosmic evil? That premise shouldn't work, and yet it does perfectly. Earthbound taught me that games don't have to make sense to be memorable. They just need confidence in their own ideas. It reminded me that personality matters, and all those seemingly random elements end up making sense within the context of the game. Some modern games are technically incredible but feel interchangeable. Earthbound looked weird, sounded weird, and behaved strangely, and that's exactly why people still talk about it decades later. And then there was Chrono Trigger, and if you've watched my channel for any amount of time, you probably know that turn-based combat has never been my favorite thing. I've always just preferred games where I have direct control, and that's nothing against turn-based games, that's just simply what my brain finds more entertaining. So I expected Chrono Trigger to be one of those games that I respected more than I actually enjoyed. Instead, it completely blindsided me. Chrono Trigger taught me that good design can overcome personal preferences. Its combat was fast and the battles flowed naturally. Enemies existed directly in the world rather than through random encounters. The pacing never dragged, and for the first time, I wasn't thinking about whether I liked turn-based combat. I was thinking about whether I was having fun. And sure enough, I was. That game forced me to admit that sometimes my assumptions about entire genres are wrong. Mega Man X taught me the value of simplicity and the power of sheer streamlinedness. That's not a word, but it is now. When I first started this journey, I pretty much thought more systems automatically meant a better game. More skill trees, more crafting, more upgrades, and more mechanics, more everything. And then I played Mega Man X. You simply have a blaster, a few abilities, and a handful of upgrades, that's pretty much it. Yet somehow it remains easily one of the most satisfying action games I've ever played in my entire life. Every mechanic serves a distinct purpose. Every upgrade actually matters and changes the gameplay. Every level introduces brand new ideas. It has probably the best tutorial section I've ever played in a game. And there is zero wasted space. Mega Man X showed me that depth and complexity are not the same thing. Some of the deepest games I've ever played were surprisingly simple. This was also the game that made modern control schemes feel even slower. The controls in Mega Man X were so refined and so responsive, it's insane. Speaking of refinement, let's talk about Donkey Kong Country 2 for a second. I enjoyed the first Donkey Kong Country a lot, and then I played the sequel and everything that I loved was still there, only every bit of it was refined and somehow improved. The level designs were more creative, the bosses were better, the environments were more varied, the collectibles were hidden more thoughtfully, and the animal buddies, which was one of my favorite parts of the first game, played a much larger role. The Lost World gave completionists something that was actually meaningful to strive for, and every new level seemed determined to introduce a fresh idea. Donkey Kong Country 2 taught me that sometimes greatness isn't always about reinventing the wheel. Sometimes greatness is simply taking an already excellent formula and refining every single aspect of it. But then there are games that are less refined but serve a bigger purpose, like laying the groundwork for future systems. Crystalis was a game that I had never even heard of before this experiment. On the surface, it's easy to notice the rough edges, the menus can be frustrating, switching between swords becomes tedious, and some of the design decisions haven't aged the best, but underneath those frustrations is something fascinating. A post-apocalyptic science fiction fantasy adventure on the NES with an ambitious story. A large interconnected world, fast-paced combat, and larger-than-life ideas that clearly exceeded the limitations of the hardware. Crystalis taught me to appreciate ambition. Even when a game isn't perfect, there's something special about the developers reaching beyond what seems possible for the time. Perhaps the biggest lesson, though, came from nostalgia. Whenever old games come up, it always seems like someone inevitably says that people only love them because they grew up with them. I myself have heard this so many times because I prefer the more classic Zelda formula over open-air Zelda, and people always say it's just nostalgia milky and this and that. While nostalgia, yes, definitely does play a part, I didn't grow up with any of these games. I have no childhood memories attached to Super Metroid, no nostalgia for Chrono Trigger, no emotional connection to Earthbound, no history with Castlevania, and no memories of rushing home after school to play Donkey Kong Country, and yet many of them became some of my favorite games. What I discovered is that nostalgia can bring you back to a game, but it can't keep you there. The game still has to be good. The best old games aren't surviving because people remember them because they survived. Of course, even with all that being said, this journey also taught me that old games are not perfect. There are plenty of frustrations, limited save systems, cryptic objectives, insane difficulty spikes, sometimes what feels like unclear progression, and moments where you wonder how anyone figured this out without the internet. I guess it really was just using the manuals, Nintendo power guides, and going over to your friend's house who's past the part that you're stuck on. For every timeless idea, there's usually something that reminds you exactly how old the game really is. But strangely, those flaws made me appreciate the successes even more, because when a game that's 30 years old still feels incredible today, that's not an accident. That's great design, and that may be the biggest thing that I've learned over the past 6 months. Good game design doesn't expire. If anything, it shines even brighter in today's gaming environment. Technology changes, graphics improve, hardware evolves, trends come and go, but great design continues forward. Whether it's Super Metroid teaching players through interconnected worlds and exploration, Chrono Trigger proving that pacing and style matters more than genre, Earthbound showing that creativity often beats realism, Mega Man X demonstrating elegant and streamlined game design and controls, Donkey Kong Country 2 refining a formula to near perfection, Castlevania creating atmosphere through art and music, or Crystallis proving that ambition matters. These older titles still have lessons to teach. 6 months ago, I started this experiment because I wanted to play old games. What I ended up finding was a greater appreciation for video games as a whole. I learned why certain titles are still talked about decades later and that innovation didn't start recently. I learned that Souls games really aren't that hard, and that limitations are fertile ground for creativity. I realized that the act of actually playing the game is the true goal, not just beating it. Some of gaming's best ideas were figured out long before I ever even picked up a controller, shoot, before I was even born. So has playing old games for 6 months really changed me? Absolutely. I still enjoy modern games, at least I think I will. I haven't played one for a long time, and I always will, as long as they're, good games. I feel like that's a pretty fair request, but now whenever I go to play something new, I'll find myself asking a question that I never used to ask. Have we truly regressed in the world of video games? And with that, we come to the end of our time travel journey. All of the games I'm playing for this series are games that you guys have recommended to me, so if you want to see more of this, feel free to drop what you'd like to see next in the comments below. The brand new subscriber of the week is none other than Mr. Atari Tom, because you, my loyal guardian, are always popping up in my notifications, so thank you for your endless support. I might actually start doing 2 subscribers of the week because there are multiple of you that are hyping the ever-living heck out of my videos, so that may be something we have to implement. And of course, don't forget to like, comment, hype, and subscribe to become a guardian of the glaze, and I'll see you next time on the Milky Donut.